In this tutorial, we're going to go over basic animation. So we're going to go ahead and get started, and we're going to animate a box. So I'm going to draw out a box on my view. Just going to change up my measurements here, something more reasonable, and we're going to animate this box here. I'm going to put a few height segments on this, just a bit, and a few length and width segments as well, just so we have a little bit room to play around with. So first off, when you're animating an object, you can either animate in auto key mode or set key mode. The difference between the two, auto key, when you have auto key on, if you go and start to move your object or translate or anything, it's going to automatically put keyframes down for you. So as you can see, it kind of recorded that that movement that I did here with the box. So I'm going to undo that. Now, set key does something completely different. If I turn on set key mode instead, now when I go and move this box around, you notice that it doesn't automatically put a keyframe for me. And if I move off the frame that I'm currently on, it's going to snap back to where it was. So with set key, you actually have to set a key. You have to hit the set key button for it to put a keyframe down. So now it's changed the origin of this box here. Let's go back and put this back at 0, 0. And we're going to go over what these actual keys are. So you don't even have to be in auto or set key mode. You can always just set a key down. Now I want you to take a look at these keys right here. There are 3 different colors here. They have red, green, and blue. Now this corresponds to your move for red, green for rotate, blue for scale. Corresponds to these 3 modes. So anytime I go out and let's say I have auto key on and I just move my box. Let's say I move my box just on the x-axis. Notice that it sets a red keyframe. And now if I go and rotate this box, turn on my angle snaps. If I rotate this box and say 90 degrees, it sets a green keyframe. And finally, if I go to my scale tool and I scale this, it sets a blue keyframe. So those are your 3 main types of keyframes that 3ds Max is going to set. So we're going to focus on just these 3 for now, and we're going to do a bit of animation. Now notice that these are happening in a specific order. So you have your start keyframes right here on frame 0. So I have position, rotation, and scale set for this frame here. And now when it goes to move, it's going to move over by a few units here, and then it's going to complete the rotation at frame 15. Let's say I wanted to move and rotate at the same time. I would take this keyframe, highlight it, and just bring it back here. So now you see the move and rotate are on top of each other now. So now it's going to move and rotate at the same time. And I can also do that with the scale. I want to scale at the same time, so I'll move the scale back to frame 10. And now you see I have all 3 colors aligned on top of each other. So now it's going to move, rotate, and scale at the same time. So let's get rid of that. And I'm going to make my initial frame 0. I'm going to move my X to -90 because I want the origin to be the center point of our animation. Because what's going to happen is I'm going to have this box jump to the other side of this home grid. So I need to set a to and a from frame. So for right now, I want my box to scale down and then scale back up. So what I can do is just put a scale key right in here. So if I just go to my scale, I'm going to scale it down on the Z axis. You see that it's going to put a blue keyframe there. Now I want to go back to the original scale. So I can either copy it from here or I can set the keyframe back to what it was. So let's try this. On frame 10, I want to copy my scale value from frame 0. So if I right click on this little bar here, you see I'll get this create key menu. And what kind of key do I want to create? I want to create just a scale key, and I want to reference my source time. I want to take the source from frame 0. My destination is going to be frame 10. So what it's going to do is it's going to copy the scale value from 0 and put it on 10. So I'm going to tell it OK. You see now it pops back to what it was. Now I also want to put my position and rotation on that same keyframe. So I can just go right here and tell it to set key. And now it sets a key for both my position and rotation as well. Now I want to go, say about frame 30, I want to have my cube go over to the other side. So I'm going to take my X position and make it positive. So 90 on the X will pop it right over to the other side. So let's see, it sets a position key because all I did was change the position, like so. So now I want my actual cube to actually rotate. But first, let's take a look at this. I want my cube to look like it's jumping. So on frame 20, which is the middle part of this, you see is that position 0 on the X. I want it to be, let's say, up in the air. So this is what it looks like. It looks like it's jumping to the other position. And let's say when it gets to here, I want it to start to scale back down a bit and then back up. Since I already have this keyframe made, I can do the same thing I did last time, which was copy the scale value from frame 5 to frame 35, or I can take this keyframe, hold shift, click and drag, and copy the frame over. So now I have my scale value. Now notice what's happening though. Notice that it's scaling from frame 10 to frame 35. That's not what I want to happen. I want it to start scaling from frame 30. So I want it to be at this scale position and then go to this position. So I need to fix this keyframe here. So what I'm going to do is copy the scale value from either 10 or 0 and put it on frame 30. So I'm going to right click here over frame 30 and let's choose frame 10. Hit OK. Now it's going to pop back to that scale value. So now it scales like that. And now I want to scale back up to that position. So now what I can do is also again copy from 30 for the scale to frame 40. Tell it OK. So now this is what I'm getting. So now let's add some rotation into this. Let's say that I want to rotate from frame 10 to frame 30. So while it's in the air, it's going to do a full 360-degree rotation. So let's try that out on frame 30. I'm going to rotate this around a full 360 degrees. So it doesn't really look like anything from this point, but if I go back to frame 0 and play the animation again, you see that it rotates around and then lands. So now it looks like the cube is actually penetrating the ground plane here. So I need to move this up a little bit. So on frame 20, I'll move this up on the Z-axis just a bit, like so. So now this is the result that I'm getting. So now that I know that this frame is how I want it to be, I'm going to copy this onto frame 40 so I get those additional 2 keyframes there. So that's one way I can do it. I'm going to undo that and to show you a different way. So another way you can set keys down without having to use set key here is if you go into your motion tab, you see under PRS parameters, you can see where you can create and delete keys. Now right now it shows that I have a scale key already, so I can only delete it, I can't create it. So if I want to, I can go hit rotation and scale, and if I move off, you see it puts a keyframe for position rotation right down here. So this is kind of a way of fine-tuning what set key does. Set key is going to set all of your keyframes down based on your key filters. So let's say I go open this menu here, key filters. Here's what set key is actually going to do. It's going to set a position, rotation, scale, and IK parameters, which we don't actually need. So let's go back to key filters. Let's say I only want to set rotation and scale, so no position. So next time I go to set key, it's only going to set a rotation and a scale value. And I can always go back if I want and add a position value. So this is a kind of way of fine-tuning what kind of keyframes you are setting, but I'm going to leave it back on position, rotation, and scale just so it's consistent. So let's play the animation, take a look at what our box is doing. So from frame 0 to 40, we have a little animation of the cube jumping, well, the box jumping, and scaling as it hits the ground before it releases, and then when it hits the ground, it scales up and down. So let's take a look at trajectories. So what trajectories are going to do is show you the curve of how your object is flowing for animation. So if I turn on trajectories here, you'll see you get this little arc right here. And this is pretty much the path that your object is following based on the pivot point. So you can see right here, my pivot point is at the center of the bottom of the box here. It's going to take the position of that pivot point and draw a little arc around and show you how it's actually flowing. So with this in mind, let's take a look at the curve editor. Now, there's several ways you can get to the curve editor. The first way you can do is you can go right here to this button right here and open curve editor. And the curve editor is going to show you a bunch of curves or lines on what your actual animation is doing. So it's going to show you a bunch of useful techniques, and we're going to go through and see what some of these are doing. So each of these little squares here are your vertices. So you can see when I select it in here, it selects here. So selecting this one, you see it corresponds down here. Now, like I said, the curves are color coded, and now I have a red key, a red curve, a green curve, and a blue curve, and that corresponds to move, rotate, and scale. You can see on the left side here, this is the name of my object, my box. And under transform, you have position, rotation, and scale. So if I look at just position X is the only position I really animated versus, well, I animated position X and position Z. There should be nothing on the Y because we move position X from this location to this location, and we move position Z, let's see, Z from this location to this location, so up, down. So you can see this is the curve for position Z. Now, the cool thing what you can do in the curve editor is you can pretty much change how these little points here are affecting the animation. So these little points here, you see these little handles right here, these are tangents. So these are going to affect how your animation is flowing. So you can see as I move it here, it's changing the trajectory of this actual cube here. So I'm just going to move this around, something like this. So it's going to get my box to kind of flow a little bit differently. So now you can see it's sort of changed the animation just a little bit. So these curves can be very useful. Let's say if I make it something extreme like this, let's take a look at both of those. You see how the curves kind of mirror each other. Now if I play it again, see what it does to the animation? Completely different. So this is going to change the overall pacing and the speed of how your keyframes flow into one another. Let's say I want to get this back to what it was. I can go back and I can reset my tangent. So if I turn this to say linear, you can see it kind of makes sort of a triangle shape. And by default, everything is set to auto. So I'm going to put this back on auto, and there's my original tangent. And now the next one I want to show you is step mode. So this mode right here is going to kind of show you what the animation looks like at different points. So if I play it, it's going to look a little bit different. Let me select everything. I want to select all of my position, rotation, and scale. So I'm going to select all of my points, and I'm going to change everything to stepped. So now it looks like little staircases here. Now if I go back to the beginning and play my animation over, you see it's kind of stepping through the animation. So it's going to the different positions and rotations and scales, but it's not transitioning in between the keyframes. So all it is showing you what it looks like at frame 5, frame 10, frame 20, 30, 35, and 40. So this is step mode. Now let's change all my tangents to smooth. And notice that my curves are flowing a little bit more. There's more of a curvature here. I want to show you how this has changed the animation. Now take a look at this. You see how my cube actually leans back a little bit before it actually jumps up? So this is what smoothing is going to do. So it's going to take the curve and it's going to kind of accentuate it a little bit. It's going to make exaggerate the curve a little bit more than it actually is. So this is smooth. This is auto. Auto, see, a little bit different. And of course you have the other ones which are fast and slow, and they're going to definitely change the way your animation flows. So this is fast. Let's see what this looks like. That's a little bit choppy. Let's try slow. So that's a little bit better, but then you have linear, which is going to be point to point. There's no smoothing in between. So we're going to leave it on auto for now, and we're going to look at some different controllers here. We're going to look at some the dope sheet. So let's say I want to change the overall timing of this animation. Let's say it's going a little bit too fast for me and I want to slow it down a bit. I need to double the amount of frames that it takes to complete the animation. So what I can do is go to my dope sheet, and the way to get to that is graph editors, dope sheet. So this is also how you get to your curve editor, and you want to go to dope sheet. And what dope sheet is going to do is it's going to show you an overall timing of all of your keyframes. So if I take a look at this, and I need to find where my actual object is. So the dope sheet is going to show you, there we go, this little curve here. Here's my object right here. Here's my box. So this is the overall timing of your animation. Right now it's set from 0 to 40. So you see that this timeline here corresponds to this timeline here. If I want to take the entire time range, let's say I want to take the entire transform, so I would use the transform and I would kind of bring it out to frame 80. So now when I go back and look at my animation, it plays a lot slower. And if you want to speed your animation up and do it the opposite way, it was originally 40 frames. So if I make it 20 frames, this will actually work out a lot better. So now I have it at 20 frames. So now my animation is a little faster. So in addition to going to the dope sheet, you can actually change your selection range down here. So not by default, you won't see this little bar right here, but if you right click and go to configure, if you turn on show selection range, you'll actually see it. I don't actually need show soundtrack because I don't even have sound in here, but show selection range, toggle it on and off, have both. So if I were to select all of my keyframes, I can move out the time it takes to actually complete. Now in here, it's going to give you a percentage value. So if you look at the bottom left, you can see where it says scaling, and it's going to show you the scaling percentage. So let's take a look at some other things you can animate in 3ds Max. So if I want to add some modifiers on this, let's say I want to add a bin modifier. So if I add a bin modifier on top of this, I can animate that as well. Now I want you to pay attention to the keyframe color that it sets. So you've already seen the red, green, and blue. Let's say that when it gets to frame 5, I want it to bend at a certain angle. Let's say bend backwards a little bit to the left. So -30. Now again, since I have auto key on, it already set a 0 frame for me. Now I want you to notice this little red bracket right here. This means that you are animating your keys here. You're actually putting keys down. Now take a look at what it did. It put black keys down. So 0 to 5, they're actually black keys now. Now these are going to override um, your red, green, and blue, but they still have your keyframes there. It's just kind of a visual indicator that there is something other than move, rotation, and scale set as your keyframes here. So if I go to my keyframe, if I hover over it and right click, and I can go through and I can delete certain keys off of this. So let's say if I want to delete the angle that I just did, I can go through, select delete, and now that's gone. Go through, delete. If I want to delete the angle, now that's gone. So now my keys are red, green, and blue again. So that's a quick way of deleting keys off of this. But I'm just going to go ahead and set my keyframes in here. So I'm going to make that -30. I'm going to make this, say, 30. And by the time I get to here, I want it to be 0 again. And then when it gets to this frame, say 30, say 60. So double. Then it's going to go back this way, -60, 30, -30, and 0. So let's take a look at what it's doing. There we go. So we got a cool kind of animation going in there, so it kind of looks like it's a little wobbly. So it kind of looks like it throws its weight down and then moves up and then around, and then it jumps down. It hits with the weight. So let's even add some more angle on this. Let's say 60 for the angle. So it's kind of like really throwing its weight. There we go. So that's our animation. And we can add on to this by adding another modifier. Let's say I want to add a taper modifier onto this. Let's say on frame 5, frame 10, I'm going to taper this a bit. Let's say by, not 2, but maybe 1. Let's just say 1 on the taper. And for the curve, I'm going to bring that down just a little bit. Say -4, so it's getting this weird shape here. So this is the shape we're getting. Let's say on 5, instead of the curve being negative, we make it positive, so it kind of makes it a little bit fat. Let's say leave that on 2. So it squashes down, it gets bigger, and it goes up, it gets skinnier, and then it slinks over. And by the time it gets to frame 30, let's have it go back to 0 and 0. And then when it gets to 35, we'll have the amount up, the curve at 2. And when it gets to here, bring the curve back negative again. So let's say -3, just make it a whole value. And here, we're going to have the curve go away and the amount go away. Let's see what the animation looks like. So, something like that. So now we have all these keyframes down here. So we can go through the curve editor and actually control these. So if I go to the curve editor, if you want to see those keyframes that you put for your modifiers, the way you find them is under modified object. So if I scroll down a bit, you'll see these are the names of the modifiers, and here's the bin modifier here. If I go to the bin, If I scroll down to the angle, this is what we animated, the angle of the bend. This is our curve for that. So if I want to, I can change my tangents to smooth, see what this does. Or maybe slow. So you can see it's kind of changing it a little bit. Maybe I put it on linear. So the changes they're a little subtle, but you can always go through and make some different changes. So let's say on frame 10, I want to make this angle a little bit more. So I can take this, kind of change the angle here, the curve for this angle, and it's going to increase the time that it takes to go back to that 0 position here. Or maybe let's say I want to go to frame 20 here and I want to reverse the angle here, so I want to add a keyframe. So I'll take the bend modifier and take the angle, make it negative, say -70. You can see that it added a value right here on the curve editor. There we go. Let's say also on frame 20, I want to change the taper. Change the, not the amount, but the curve. Something like 3. So my shape kind of transforms as it goes in the air. There we go, something like that. So this is some really basic animation techniques. You can go through and kind of tweak the tangents how you want to get different effects. You can add some angles and all sorts of modifiers to this to get the results you want. But let's say I want to go through here and add a little bit more fine tuning in here. Let's say I want to make this animation continue infinitely. So I'm going to stretch out my keyframes here. I'm going to go to my time configuration down here, and I'm going to set my end keyframe to something like 300. So now it expands my timeline out here. So now I have all this extra space over here to play with and add some more keyframes. But I don't want to hand animate all of these keyframes because I already have the animation like I want it, but I want to continue it on this path. I want it to continue doing exactly what it just did, what I've already animated. What I can do is I can use an out of range type to actually get this to work. So here's another way you can get to the curve editor down here. If you open mini curve editor, this is another way you can get to it without actually having to open it. So that's there too. But if I want to do some more fine tuning here, I'm going to go to the curve editor up here and I'm going to look for edit controller out of range types. So in the other version of Max, you would have just a tab here that's called controller. It would just be this, and you would go straight down to out of range types. So out of range types is going to give you the ability to change this this curve here. So let's say I want it to cycle. And you see it's already changed the curve here. What it's going to do is going to copy this and it's going to repeat it infinitely. So now when I play this animation, you see that it's going to keep replaying itself. So if I go back to out of range type, so another way you can get there is if you go and right click on a negative space here and go to show toolbars and curves. So this is what that was. So show toolbars, curves, you'll get this little button right here, out of range type. So you can just click on that and it'll bring up this dialog. Let's say I want it to loop. Now loop is going to give you pretty much the same result as curve, the previous one. So the next one is, let's say, relative repeat. So now it's going to continue on and on along that path, going that direction. So it's taking the position that I had it set and it's moving and moving and moving and moving. So this is what the relative repeat is going to do. Pretty cool. Let's say I wanted to jump back and forth between this home grid here. Then I would change it to ping pong. If I change it to ping pong, now it's going to jump back and forth. Now let's take a look at this. I have it ping ponging all around. And now I'm going to go back and kind of change what it's doing here. So I got some pretty cool animation going on here. I can always go back and make changes here. So if I want to change it, put it back on maybe linear. This is going to be different. Put it back on constant. So constant, what it was, is what it was originally on. Now I'm only changing this out of range type for just the scale. So I can do the same thing for the rotation. Put it back on constant. For the position, put it back on constant. So now back to where it was. Let's see if I go into taper and see what did I change in here. I changed the amount. I can have this ping pong as well. Let's see what this is doing. So now I'm getting a different effect because it's only affecting just the amount. So it's going to scale back and forth. So you can have something kind of pulsating. Let's say I want to change the curvature as well. Go out of range tape and have that cycle. So now it's getting a really weird effect because it's going based on these keyframes. So now this is completely adding some new animation onto my box here without actually adding new keyframes. So out of range types is a really cool tool. Now you just gotta keep in mind on where you're actually applying this to, because right now I applied this to just the curvature and the amount. So if I go back and take that off, there we go. Everything's back to normal. You can also animate lights. Let's say if I want a flickering light in the scene, let's go ahead and add a plane here so we can have some point of reference for our shadows. Add a light, go to standard, and it'll go free spotlight. going to drop that in here. I'm making sure I have illuminate with scene lights on. Just going to change some of the parameters in here, turn shadows on so I get shadows. Change the spotlight parameters. Change the fall off a bit. Wait for it to update. So now I can see what's going on in here. So let's go back and animate this again, going back and forth. So again, let's try this out. Go to Graph Editors, Curve Editor, and I want to animate all of this, my X position, my rotation, my scale. I want to go to my taper, and I want to animate the amount, the curvature. I want to go to bend. I want to animate the angle. I want to animate all of that. So I'm going to make sure this is on ping pong. It's going to animate, it's going to add the outer range type for all of those curves. So now I have my box going right back and forth. Alright, so you can see the shadows are working. Let's try and animate this light. So let's say you want to have a flickering light in your house. The way you can do that, let's change my timeline down here. So what I'm doing to change the timeline, if you hold Control, Alt, and right click and drag, you can change the end time frame. If you hold Control, Alt, left click and drag, you can change the beginning time frame. If you Control, Alt, and middle click, you can change the entire range without changing the start and finish. So you're changing basically the start and finish at the same time. And you're just changing the range of it. So I'm going to set this back to something like 100 frames, just so we have a little bit less to look at down here. And I'm going to animate this multiplier, because you can't animate things with checkboxes in 3ds Max. So if I turn on auto key and try to animate this, that's not going to work. That's not going to work. It has to be a spinner. So let's say on frame 5, I have the multiplier go down to 0, which is essentially the light is off, and it started at 1. So it's going to go from on to off. Now I want to copy this again, make this go on, copy this, off. And then when I get to frame 20, let's say I want to make it a little bit brighter, so maybe 3 for the multiplier, and then copy the off frame again for off. And now I want it to stay off for quite a bit. So let's say between 25 and 40, it's going to be off. So this is what I'm getting here. The light is, it's not really flickering. It's kind of pulsing between the multiplier. But what I want to do is I want it to quickly turn on and off. So I need to change my my tangents. So I can open my mini curve editor and do it there. So if I select everything over here, all of my keyframes right here, and I open the mini curve editor, I want to set my tangents to stepped. Now sometimes it doesn't allow you to change anything that's not a uh, position, rotation, and scale inside of the mini curve editor. Mini curve editor is a little bit limited. So if I scroll down just a little bit and I look for my object free spot, there it is, my multiplier. So these are the keyframes I want to change here. So I want to change my keyframes to stepped. So now when I play through the animation, you see the light turns on and off instantly. It looks like it's flickering. Close that. So now I want to change the amount of time it takes to flicker. So let's say I want to cut this in half. So I'm going to move this down to, you see where it says scaling? Scaling by 50%. So now it's going to happen twice as fast. Or something like that. So now I want to use my out of range types on this as well. So I'll go back to, let's say, my mini curve editor. And I want to scroll down to the multiplier here. And I'm going to edit, controller, out of range types. And I want this to cycle. So now if I play this, it keeps flickering on and off. And I can always go through, and I want to add my curves in here. So now I can go to my out of range types right here instead of going through the menu and doing it. So right here, say I want it to loop. Let's see what relative repeat is going to do. So that's more of a short flickering effect. Linear, not working out too well. So let's say ping pong. Now it's flickering a lot. So just by going through here and changing your out of range types, you can get really different effects here. So this has been some really basic animation techniques. I kind of want to go over one more thing with you. I want to show you how to put a camera on a path, but we're going to go through that in another tutorial. So this is how to get started with basic animation. If you have any questions, just email me.